They're not good enough to start. They're not even good enough to play. But they do talk a good game. So come join Lou and Jose from the sidelines where all the best sports discussions happen anyway. Welcome in to the Benchwarmers podcast.
Welcome into the program, everybody. I am Lou Ruggieri, and that is Jose Ortiz, and this is the Benchwarmers podcast. Wherever, whenever, and however you happen to listen, we appreciate you taking some time to spend it with us. We think it's going to be worth your while, and this is officially, welcome in, this is officially Season 2 of the Benchwarmers podcast. In the modern parlance of entertainment, it seems like all things are in seasons now, so we went through our first full year. This is the official week 1 of Season 2, so welcome in. Hopefully you're following along and have been following along on the iHeartRadio podcasting app, Amazon Podcasts, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. We're at the Benchwarmers Podcast, at the BW Pod on Twitter, or the newly formed thebenchwarmers.com, Benchwarmers with a Z for marketing purposes. A big show coming up a little bit later. We have a championship matchup in our breakfast cereal bracket. Very exciting. It's Lucky Charms taking on Cinnamon Toast Crunch. We'll get to your votes and our votes and see who is walking away the champion of our first annual breakfast cereal bracket. I'm not sure if they're all going to be breakfast cereals, but we'll get to that later. NBA, we're going to go around the NBA, a lot to talk about, some news coming up in a little bit. We have a website spotlight that we're going to touch on very shortly on Julian Edelman, whether or not he's a Hall of Famer. I have a scintillating article on the website, thebenchwarmers.com, that Jose vehemently disagrees with. We'll get into that in a little bit also. Reload or Rebuild is the pre-draft. We're going to do a pre-draft and post-draft version of Reload or Rebuild. We did the AFC last week, and this week we're going to do the NFC teams. But first, it is time for This Week in Sports. Jose, your former 49er, Alex Smith, has officially retired. I'm wondering how I don't think I've ever asked you how you felt about the 49ers choosing him number 1 overall. I mean, obviously in retrospect, it probably would have been better to take Aaron Rodgers.
Maybe.
I think we've all agreed with that. But at the time, I don't remember how at the time if you were okay with it or not.
You know, to be honest with you, at the time, I didn't really know a lot about Aaron Rodgers. I knew that he was in discussion with Alex Smith to be the number 1 pick, but I'd be lying if I said, I knew the whole time they should have taken Aaron Rodgers. I'm not going to be that guy. Like, I didn't know.
I don't think a lot of people did, honestly.
And I feel like the consensus was leaning towards Alex Smith, if I recall correctly. As far as, it's funny, I was thinking about Alex Smith today, and I asked myself, is Alex Smith a bust? And I guess the answer is probably yes, because you're the number 1 pick. And if you're on a perennial Pro Bowler and a borderline Hall of Famer, then you're a bust as a number 1 pick. But the one thing that I did think about is, listen, he peaked when he went to play with Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs, where they put him in a position to succeed. And it just goes to show you can have talent, but if you don't get drafted into the right situation, your talent is not going to be is not likely to be maximized. And I think that's kind of the story of Alex Smith's career, that he got drafted into a bad situation, my 49ers, but it was just a bad situation for quite some time, and he never really quite got to kind of find his footing until he went to Kansas City.
Yeah, and that first year, 2013, was his first ever Pro Bowl selection. He made it 2 more times with Kansas City in 16 and 17, but I was looking over his stats a little bit because I was thinking, is Alex Smith a Hall of Famer? And I don't think so. And no. He was the comeback player of the year last year. He's had a great, pretty good career. But I think it comes to, and it's a lot of what we're going to talk about Julian Edelman a little bit. At least my end of it is, it's context and it's expectations. Where, just like you said, I think if Alex Smith and Aaron Rodgers had switched places, our views of both of them would be very different. Because, Aaron Rodgers is what we'd expect. His career is what we'd expect from a number 1 overall pick. While Alex Smith, if it's the tail end of the first round, even then, I'm not sure that he would have lived up to it. But our expectations would have been so much less for him. And maybe we would have seen him as a pleasant surprise rather than kind of a somewhat disappointment.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's almost like if he had got where Andy Dalton was a 2nd round pick, if he gets drafted there, maybe we're looking at Alex Smith the same way we look at Andy Dalton right now.
Dak Prescott. Same thing.
Or Dak Prescott, for example. Yeah, no. I will say though, draft position and everything. Alex Smith never really. I mean, except for when he went to Kansas City, right? He never really had that prolific regular season. He just wasn't that type of quarterback.
Yeah. Looking at his numbers, the most touchdowns he ever threw was in 2017. He threw 26 touchdowns,
5 interceptions. That's great.
Yeah, and he also had 4,042 yards, which was also a career high, and his highest completion percentage, his second highest completion percentage, 67.5. He beat that in 2012 in San Francisco at 70.2, which is crazy.
And it does make you wonder if he had gotten drafted by, I'd be lying. I will go back in time. I don't remember what team exactly was good or bad at that time, but if he had been drafted by a better franchise, it makes you wonder what his career numbers would look like right now.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, is you got to remember, if you're being drafted first overall, odds are the team you're getting drafted to is not very good.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of – and it does lead me into wondering about the 49ers now, because they're in sort of a similar situation where, they had it's different in the sense that they have a good team that was injured. So
yeah. And they traded back.
Yeah. And they have that looks like they're going to be taking a quarterback. They traded up. They spent all those picks. Mm-hmm. And – it seems like the consensus is that it's going to be Mac Jones that they pick.
I really hope it's not Mac Jones, but go ahead.
I don't know. And that's what I mean. It's one of those things where, again, had the 49ers waited and just let Mac Jones come to them, I feel like we wouldn't be as kind of on edge about it. Whereas moving up to the 3rd overall pick and then taking Mac Jones, now the expectations are going to be so much higher because it's like, well, you better be good. We just gave up most of our future for you, so don't make us wrong.
I don't want. We have draft coverage coming next week, obviously with the NFL draft. I don't want to get too far on a tangent here. We have a lot to get to.
Yeah.
I hope the pick is not Mac Jones because he probably would have still been there had they just waited. So I hope they moved up to get Trey Lance or Justin Fields or whomever because you can't be giving up all those picks to get a guy who was probably going to be there at 13 or 12. I'm sorry.
But yeah, so that's Alex Smith. Good player, not great. Alex Smith could be maybe first team all bridge quarterback.
Yeah. Ooh,
I think he's up there.
I think that.
He's up there with Tyrod Taylor, maybe.
Well, obviously the number one is Drew Bledsoe.
Drew Bledsoe. I guess. Yeah, he got Brady'd. And
or Breeze, right? Drew Brees was a bridge to Phillip Rivers.
Well, yeah, but it depends. I feel like it depends on what happens in New Orleans now.
Yeah,
because he only had it once, and arguably, I think Drew Brees was better than Phillip Rivers.
Absolutely.
So it's hard, it's different with the case of Brady and Bledsoe or Tyrod Taylor and anybody really.
Yeah.
So Alex Smith, first team all because he was Colin Kaepernick at the 49ers. It was Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes. Washington, I don't know.
He was a good player and an even better person, but not a great player. And that's okay. Not everyone can be great. We need good players too, because not everyone can be great.
Yeah, and he made plenty of money. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Switching over to the NBA, Jamal Murray tore his ACL. He's out for the year. This is just awful. I feel bad for him. I feel bad for the Nuggets. It's just I don't know. I don't know what else to say other than just I hate seeing this basketball players, especially good ones, go down with this injury.
Yeah, and you just never know how a player is going to come back from an injury like this. There's a lot of good history in that, so hopefully he'll be fine as a young player, but it basically ends any chance they thought they had of going deep into the postseason. This was a team that went to the Western Conference Finals just last year, and I'm sure we're thinking about going back.
Yeah, that was a Cinderella story that looks like that storybook is closed for this year, which is a shame, but maybe it'll end up being...
Maybe Nikola Jokic can get it done, but I don't think so.
Probably not. Not by himself. No. Donovan Mitchell, speaking of injuries, Donovan Mitchell is out at least a week with a much less serious injury with a sprained ankle. But, how much does this affect the Jazz playoff?
Well, assuming he comes back healthy, right? We don't know what sprained ankles, right? If he's not healthy, they have no chance. even if he is healthy, I don't truly believe in the Utah Jazz making a deep run. But they do have the best record in the NBA. You have to show them some respect. So assume that they can win a few rounds. If he's not there, it's not possible. The one thing I will say is that this may be a blessing in disguise, just because let's say, assuming he comes back healthy, they could end up as the number 3 seed, and now they don't have to play the Golden State Warriors or the Dallas Mavericks in the first round. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure who the 6th seed is right now off the top of my head. Trailblazers.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, I guess the Trailblazers is no cakewalk either, but the way, and we'll get to it later, the way Steph Curry is playing right now, I would not want to see the Warriors in the first round of the NBA playoffs.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the Jazz, the Jazz, I think, could beat the Trailblazers. As much as I love Damian Lillard, I just don't think that they have enough pieces to beat the Jazz in a 7-game series. But yeah, you're right. The Jazz they're 42 wins as of right now. The Suns and the Clippers are right on their heels though, with 40 wins each. The Clippers a little further back. They have 19 losses versus the Jazz 15, but still, I mean, that that's a tight race at the top there, and that could kind of swing pretty quickly. Depending on this injury.
No, because you're not going to rush him back, right? Why would you rush him back? You're basically locked into the playoffs right now. You're probably going to be a top 4 seed no matter what happens for the rest of the way. Why on earth would you rush Donovan Mitchell back? So it's definitely possible that Phoenix and the Clippers pass them, and it's not unheard of that another team could pass them either. So yeah.
Going out to the East, Lamarcus Aldridge kind of unexpectedly retired due to an irregular heartbeat. It's interesting with the Nets. I think Aldridge was a good signing because they needed sort of a bigger presence down low. And this, not that they were playing good defense to begin with, but I think this hurts their defensive potential even more.
Well, yeah, I mean, not only that, but this is just a depth piece on a team that can't stay healthy. Right, someone. What did you tell me that was last week or a couple weeks ago? You said that Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving had only played 7 games together the entire season. This is a team that seems to be struggling with health so far this season. So to lose a player like this, albeit a little bit diminished, but I do want to point out that Lamarcus Aldridge, good player, former number 2 overall pick in the 2006 draft, 19 points per game, 19.4 points per game, 8.2 rebounds, 1.1 blocks. I think he's good. I think slightly underrated. And I wish him well in his health. But yeah, this definitely hurts the Nets.
Yeah, it's not good. And the injury, I feel like the only thing that can stop the Brooklyn's offense is injuries. And it's a real thing. It's not good.
They're a regular team with only 2 of the 3.
Right.
Well, not regular, but they're not quite as superhuman or super. They're not that super team without 3 of them.
I agree. Steph Curry, speaking of super team, Steph Curry passes Wilt Chamberlain on the Warriors' all-time scoring list.
Wow.
He has just been amazing. He's had 9 games with 30 or more points. Do you know who is at the top of that list?
Wilt Chamberlain, 65.
Do you know in the last 30 years who's on the top of that list?
Because
you're right. Yes, I forgot about Wilt Chamberlain.
Probably Kobe Bryant.
Kobe Bryant, 10, yeah. Jordan's on there
actually,
twice.
No, it's got to be in the last 10 years because I actually looked it up. I saw James Harden had like 30-something games straight.
Of 30 points or more?
Yeah, he had 32. So I think the stat is that he was I'm not sure exactly what the stat is, but I just saw that. I was looking it up. The most consecutive, Wilt Chamberlain has 65, James Harden had 32, and then Wilt has 3rd, 4th, and 5th place. From what I'm seeing here, this is on interbasket.net, so it's not exactly a who's who of websites or anything.
Then you know what, the stat that I was looking at was different then because
this was in 2018, 2019. So I don't know. This is when James Harden was kind of going crazy and people were like, "Oh, he's better than Michael Jordan."
Yeah.
So I mean, regardless, he's doing. I think I know that Kobe Bryant had 10 straight, and he tied. Like he tied Kobe Bryant because he's actually up to 10 straight now, and he might have gone up to 11, depending on how tonight's game is going against the 76ers. But he had 10 straight games, which tied Kobe Bryant for whatever spot that was.
Yeah.
And then, I happened to look at just because I was surprised that Jordan never had more than 11 in a row. Like, I looked it up, I was like, oh, Jordan's going to be at the top of this list.
But I think in 96, I think he had 2 streaks in the same season.
Oh, okay. Well,
and it was like, there was like one break. You know, it was like 1 game or 2 games where he had a break. Yeah. Steph Curry also, by the way, is one of 4 players to have multiple seasons with 3 or more 50-point games.
I did not know.
Yeah, the other 3 players, you may have heard of them. James Harden, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. Pretty good. Good.
So Wilt Chamberlain didn't have that many 50-point games?
Since 1976.
Oh, since 1976. I missed that part. Okay. Yeah. Because I was like, Wilt was just...
Wilt's a different level. I was thinking about Wilt the other day, as a matter of fact, because somebody was telling me about Babe Ruth, and I was the iconic status that Babe Ruth has in our heads in baseball. You know, where he's just sort of the godfather of baseball stats, pretty much from front to back, top to bottom. Because somebody was talking about Shohei Ohtani, and then they brought up Babe Ruth, and it's like, what? He's the only because he pitches and hits. That's the only correlation.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
And it got me thinking about Wilt Chamberlain, because Wilt Chamberlain, I was looking at some of his numbers for some show prep I was doing the other day, and it's just insanity. Yeah. Like, Wilt Chamberlain does not get, if he was on TV, it wouldn't even be close. There'd be no talk of Jordan or LeBron or Kobe or Shaq or anything. Wilt Chamberlain was easily the most dominant force in NBA history, and that's saying a lot. But if you look at his numbers, he averaged 50.4
a game. Yeah.
Like, come on. That's just stupid.
There's two things. You're right. Well, 3 things. 1, you're right. 2, you have to remember when Wilt was playing, there was only like 12 teams in the NBA.
Yeah.
So the talent pool, it's hard to compare that to where Jordan or, these other players are playing, where there was 32 teams. Yeah. Now it's a much larger talent pool, and not everyone's in Boston or the Lakers. And the one thing that really, really hurts Wilt, he only has 2 rings. And you're playing at the same time as Bill Russell, who has, 11 rings? Like, I mean, it's just insane. So, it's kind of like echoing what you talk about with Julian Edelman a little bit, where it's like Bill Russell did it when it counted, right? Like, isn't that what people talk about? Yeah. And that's kind of where Wilt Chamberlain falls short a little bit. And I think that's more pronounced in the NBA than in the sport.
I guess that's true, because Babe Ruth did have 7 World Series championships.
Yeah.
that's a fair point. That's fair.
Yeah.
But it just got me thinking about Wilt. I feel like Wilt gets the shaft a little bit.
He does get forgotten a little bit. He does.
Speaking of NBA players, Dwyane Wade has kind of weirdly become part owner of the Utah Jazz, which I found interesting. I don't know. I guess you have to take your ownership where you can get it. I didn't think, Dwyane Wade, a Miami guy, he's from Chicago. It just didn't seem like Utah would be the place that he would want to kind of invest in, but I guess maybe the opportunity was there, so good for him.
Yeah, I would say good for him. It would have been nice to see him become an owner of the Heat, but Mickey Arrison's not going anywhere. So, you got to take it where you can get it. Good for Dwyane Wade. I like when players become owners.
Yep. This week in sports, we are going to switch back to the NFL. The Browns have signed Jadeveon Clowney. And I felt like this move was kind of a sneaky good move. Jadeveon Clowney is, you talk about, Alex Smith being a bust. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney is, pretty much after he hit Vincent Smith on Michigan, he's never come close to being that player ever again. He had one amazing hit in college in the Outback Bowl, and that's basically what got him drafted where he was drafted. And so I think opposite Myles Garrett on Cleveland, he could be very good. And I was kind of harping on this point all week to people that I was talking to about it. But then I realized, I'm like, wait, he was on the Texans opposite J.J. Watt when J.J. Watt was like the greatest. And you could argue that maybe Jadeveon Clowney helped J.J. Watt become better, so you could make – I'm just saying, you could make the argument.
Well, look, he is a 3-time Pro Bowler. I don't want to forget that. Like, he's had some good years. It doesn't always show up, per se, in the sack numbers. I think it's a pretty good signing for a team that's in a conference looking up at Buffalo and Kansas City, right? You have two. We can expect Buffalo and Kansas City to put up big points this year, have great offenses.
Yep.
We can't expect that from the Browns this year. They're going to need to figure out something on defense to kind of level the playing field. I like the move. There's really nothing to not like about it.
Yeah, I mean it's a cheap investment. I think it shows that the Browns are going all in for with the tail end of Baker's rookie deal, which and that's the window. Once if it comes time where Baker's going to have to get paid, the Browns can't keep all of the talent they have right now, and they're going to have to make some serious decisions on whether or not they want to move off Baker or they want to move off some of the other players.
Yep.
So right now you have this is your golden window. And they came close to beating the Chiefs last season. I thought that they had a golden opportunity. And Cleveland became Cleveland towards the end of that game. Where they fumbled out of the end zone, and that was just
oh my gosh, that's right,
heartbreaking. I
completely forgot about that play.
Yeah. And so it's just this season. I mean, obviously injuries are always a factor, but if they stay healthy, I mean, Cleveland. I feel like Vegas is under. I think they have them set at 9.5 wins in a 17-game season, and I think that's just crazy undervalued. I can't
wait till we play our over/under games later this offseason. It's going to be fun.
Arizona Cardinals signed James Conner. Finally, James Conner finds a way to go. I don't know. They jettisoned Kenyon Drake, and they signed James Conner. I don't know if that's an upgrade. It kind of strikes me as a little bit of a downgrade, honestly, but
I think he might be signed to be a backup to Chase Edmonds. I'm not really sure why they signed him.
Maybe just depth.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. It's just James Conner. Yeah, he was a highlight for about half a season and then nothing.
Maybe they don't want to spend any draft capital on a running back. I don't know how many draft picks the Cardinals have, but perhaps they just don't want to draft a running back and they just need depth, like you said.
Yeah. So, and then finally, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but Trevor Lawrence said in a Sports Illustrated interview, paraphrasing, basically that he doesn't have a chip on his shoulder, that, his life isn't only about football, and he's getting married. He's 21. He just got married over the weekend. So, I don't know. It just raised some questions for a lot of people in the business about whether or not that's a good thing or not for him to kind of say, like, I don't have this chip on my shoulder that some of these other guys do.
Well, I think this is the reason why many athletes aren't honest, and they just tell you what you want to hear, right? Because the minute they give you an honest answer, they get ripped apart for it. I think sometimes people forget that these athletes are human and have goals and thoughts that extend beyond sports.
Yeah.
And I catch myself doing this too, where we act like these guys are getting paid millions of dollars. They shouldn't do anything but read their playbook, exercise, watch video, go to the gym, train, eat, and sleep, wake up, and do it again. Like, that's not realistic. It doesn't matter how much money you make. I commend him for being honest. He doesn't need football to complete him, and I bet that's a perspective that a lot of retired athletes wish that they had when looking back at their careers, where now they're like, no, I'm done with football. What's my life worth now? Like, that said, it's probably not what you'd want to hear, even if it is true. And you probably, it's just, you kind of want to have your athlete be, hey, I'm obsessed with football. All I do is think about football. But even if they said it, it wouldn't be true.
Yeah, I had two conflicting thoughts about this. The first was when I first heard it, the first person I thought of was Andrew Luck. And that Andrew Luck, number 1 overall pick, but he always was kind of, it never felt like he loved football. It felt like he enjoyed the process and he was good at it. But it felt like he always had, he had a book club, for God's sake. I mean, he had, a lot of outside interests that extended far beyond football. And, it's tough to say whether or not that was how big of a factor that was in his early retirement. After 6 years, I mean, it's, Andrew Luck was on his way to a Hall of Fame career. And now, it's hard to make the case for him. He made it to one AFC championship, and that's he had some good seasons, but that's not quite enough. And 6 years is not a long time for a quarterback. But then the other side of the coin, what I thought about more once I started thinking more about it was, well, Trevor Lawrence has basically been told he's the greatest thing in the entire world probably since his freshman year of high school, if not earlier. So it's kind of hard if everyone around you is telling you that you're the greatest thing since sliced bread to feel like you have something to prove. It's just kind of like, well, yeah, I'm great. Like, so that mentality, I don't know how, if he were to get chosen third in the draft, after all this hype and having said, everyone predicting he's going to be the first pick in the draft for basically since he started at Clemson, then maybe he would have a chip on his shoulder. But it's like, it's kind of that Peyton Manning feel where it's like, well, yeah, it may not be a chip, but, and Peyton was a little more obsessive, which I think is what we're looking at is the problem here. But it felt like Peyton didn't have a chip on his shoulder so much as that he just was obsessively compulsive about playing the game and playing things his way. But I don't know. It's interesting. I'm very curious to see how we look back on that quote 5 years from now.
Yeah, how will that quote age? That's a great way of looking at it. I mean, you do kind of want to have a guy, I think obsessed is the right word. Like, you do want to have a guy who's just obsessed with the game. When you get home, you're watching video, you're doing all this stuff. But once again, even Peyton Manning, as obsessed as he was, right? He was still doing commercials. I don't remember what commercials he was doing, but he was doing commercials for this one and that one. He had his own
SNL.
Yeah, hosting SNL. He had his own thing. Michael Jordan had all sorts of stuff going on the outside of basketball. It doesn't mean that you're not obsessed. It doesn't mean that you're not into it. You can have a life outside of sports. It's okay. You can still be a great, amazing player and have a family, which, probably should be more important than your football career, and things like that, and still be a great football player. We've seen it with Tom Brady, who's got a beautiful wife, beautiful family, right? I'm sure he values his family more than he values his football career.
I would probably, I don't know. That'd be, if Tom was being really honest with himself, I wonder what he would say to that. But don't forget, Tom was picked 199th overall. So Tom came into the league with something to prove. Yeah. And I think that over the course of time, we've seen more people than not. How many undrafted free agents do we see that, they come into the league and they just take over because they just have this burden on them where they just have to prove that they are worthwhile. And, the underrated player seems to, and again, it could be context where we expect less, so we see more, and that gap is different. But the underrated players seem to do better than sort of the ones that we expect a lot from, which leads me to point out our very next bit where our website spotlight this week is an article that I wrote this week. Whether or not Julian Edelman, it's an argument that Julian Edelman is a Hall of Famer. And Edelman basically personifies and embodies everything that we just talked about in terms of being underrated and undervalued. And, I don't want to give away the whole article. You can go to thebenchwarmers.com to check it out and read it. But I kind of laid out some pretty, what I thought were compelling arguments. I'll give myself that much. They might not be convincing, especially not to you, Jose, but I think that they were compelling enough to at least make you consider the fact that maybe Julian Edelman does belong in the Football Hall of Fame.
There's 2 points I'm going to bring up, one in your favor and one against.
That's very charitable.
Yes. No, because I don't want to give away everything too. You make a lot of good points, so I don't want to.
Yeah, I don't want to rehash. We're not going to rehash the whole article. It's just
exactly. So the fact that he excelled in the postseason is like such a heavy factor in his favor, and it really should be heavily considered. The problem is that he only played 19 career postseason games versus over 100 regular season games. So it's hard to kind of reconcile. Okay, so he was elite for 19 postseason games, and then what is the number? 137 regular season games. He was a good player, but didn't really come close to being great. And I think the one issue with his career that I noticed is that although it looks like he has 11 seasons, he really only had 6 full years. Yeah. And it's hard to build Hall of Fame credentials in 6 years. It's just very, very difficult to do so. But the one thing that I will say that's in your favor, aside from the postseason numbers, that you pointed out is a really important point. He's not a regular wide receiver. He's a slot receiver. And we kind of already maybe subconsciously look at that as a different position than the X receiver or the Y receiver. That's a different position. And it takes a different type of player to excel at that position. And obviously, Wes Welker is number one all time as the slot receiver, I think. Oh, maybe not say obviously, but I think pretty strong argument that he's number one all time slot receiver. But after Wes Welker, Julian Edelman's right there. I was looking at like a list of the all time great slot receivers.
Yep.
And Wayne Corbett, Ernest Givens, and Charlie Joyner are like the only three other players where you look at their regular season numbers and they probably have a favorable argument against Edelman, but only because they had more years of like more full seasons of being productive. Whereas Edelman kind of was, like you pointed out, hampered early in his year by just having too many good players in front of him, and at the end of his career by injuries. Yeah. So when you look at that, the fact that he's undoubtedly a top 5 slot receiver and possibly the number 2 slot receiver of all time, that's a strong argument in favor of him being a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is, Wes Welker I look at him as sort of the godfather of the slot receiver position. We didn't really start using that terminology until, probably the mid 2000s, I'd say. Maybe Brandon Stokely is the first guy that I remember somebody saying that about.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen Jarvis Landry. He's an amazing, he's same kind of guy. But Wes Welker is kind of the one that I look at as sort of the
revolutionized
prototype
position.
Yeah. And, we were talking about this earlier and pointing out the fact that Welker had Randy Moss on the other side of, as receipt catching balls. That certainly helped to open him up across the middle. And, that could have lent itself to having some inflated stats that Welker has over Edelman. But then Edelman's got 3 rings. I mean, that's the thing. And that's the problem. And that point that I kind of made in the article is that it's hard to say, because there's certain people where you can say, well, okay, if it's just postseason play, then why isn't David Tyree in the Hall of Fame? Well, because David Tyree, you could argue, made a lucky catch once, and that's it. Santonio Holmes, you could say he had one lucky catch where he had one moment of unbelievability. But Edelman's been doing it. We've seen him do it over and over and over again, where he threw, a game-winning touchdown pass to win the divisional round against the Ravens, where he scored the go-ahead touchdown against the Seattle Seahawks after just taking a crushing hit from Cam Chancellor. That obviously the Atlanta catch was just stupid. And, we've seen it so many times that while it's true, it just, if you put it in the context of slot receiver, because Cole Beasley is never going to be compared to Randy Moss. There's no chance that Cole Beasley will ever be as good as Randy Moss in any receiving statistic that you can think of, unless you say this is a subset of this position.
Yep.
And that's the only other thing that I thought about too, is that it kind of upset me a little bit because I realized that Troy Aikman has a pretty strong tie to Julian Edelman. And, growing up a Cowboys fan, I idolized Troy Aikman. And you start digging into the stats, and Troy Aikman's stats are not great. You could make a very, very compelling argument that Troy Aikman was just, he happened to be the quarterback, but he was just sort of a contributor to a team that was built from the inside out. I mean, that offensive line and defensive line were the real powerhouses of that team, and everyone else benefited from that foundation. But Troy Aikman, what did he do? He won when it mattered the most. He had, 14 game-winning drives, I think, in the playoffs. He has 3 rings, and he was this, obviously being the quarterback, he gets a lot of more credit than, a slot receiver does. But, regular season-wise, he was nothing special. I don't think he threw for more than 23 touchdowns in a season. Yeah. So
no, go ahead, finish your point. Sorry.
No, it's one of those things where it's a sliding scale, and that's kind of what I talk about in the article. It's just that it's a sliding scale of importance and what we choose to focus on with different people. And I think if Edelman and the last comparison I'll make is Eli Manning, where it's regular season, the only thing Eli ever led in statistically was interceptions. It's the only thing he ever led the league in. And while he was a compiler, he's still top 10 in touchdowns and yards. He made Eli's Hall of Fame ballot is going to be based on basically 2 passes that he made in 2 Super Bowls.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Because if you took those 2 Super Bowls away from Eli Manning, no chance. No one would even think about him as a Hall of Famer.
Prayer.
He would be a good player. He'd be a really good player, but not a Hall of Famer. Just to finish off what you were talking about, which is like Troy Aikman being on the team or whatever, we'd be lying, and everyone knows it if you didn't admit that the team that you're on impacts what you accomplish in your career. And Julian Edelman happened to win 3 Super Bowls, and you can't just, we could say, oh, well, he played with Tom Brady. Like, oh, well, he's played with Tom Brady. So did Wes Welker. He didn't have 3 Super Bowls. Wes Welker also played with Peyton Manning. He doesn't have 3 Super Bowls. Julian Edelman does. So it's definitely a point in his favor.
Yeah, and the thing about I don't want to diminish the regular season too much, but I was thinking about it more and more. What Edelman did in the playoffs, you crank up the pressure and the spotlight so much.
Absolutely.
And then the Super Bowl against the Rams, he had 10 catches for 141 yards, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that in the Super Bowl is unbelievable. If that's week 2 against the Texans, or how about this? Andre Johnson versus Julian Edelman. Whose career would you rather have? Andre Johnson he's up there in all-time yards. He's never even sniffed, I think, the playoffs. But he's considered to be one of the best receivers.
So I think that you and I look at this differently, because I think I'd rather be Andre Johnson, because I can say I was one of the greatest receivers of all time, or at least of my generation, and I had a trash quarterback every year, right? So it's like, oh, you won 3 Super Bowls, but you did have the GOAT as your quarterback. Oh, you did have the greatest head coach of all time. So you can always kind of discuss Julian Edelman as, yeah, he's not winning 3 Super Bowls if he's on any other team.
Yeah, except the problem is that he was.
Exactly.
And he did. And so, yeah, it's tough to, this in the same way that we try to give credit for a guy like Andre Johnson who had a terrible quarterback. You can't really take that away from Julian. Like, he made the most of the situations he was put in. That's it.
Yeah. So that's all you can do.
Anyway, all right.
Take a look at the article. It's a really good article.
Read the article. There's a lot of good stats. There's a lot of comparisons. There's I start off talking about porn in the article, just so if that's a good scintillating tease. It's nothing graphic, but I tried to take a different take on it to start off. So Julian Edelman, in my opinion, Hall of Famer. Go check it out. thebenchwarmers.com. It's on the homepage. You just got to scroll down for a featured article, and we're going to be putting up one of those at least once a week for the time being. And there's some good ones on there. I'm not going to lie. We got some good stuff. So check it out. Everything is well thought out and well researched. So it's not just its opinion, but there's facts behind it and reasoning. So we're not just doing hot takes for the sake of clicks. But all right, I'm going to take a break, and we're going to stick with the NFL. So we're going to come back. We have to do our rebuild or reload. It's the NFC edition. So that we're going to do this pre-draft and post-draft and see which teams in the NFC need to reload or rebuild this coming season. So stick around, stay tuned for that and more. This is the Benchwarmers Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Benchwarmers Podcast. Follow along with us on the Benchwarmers Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to review us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're sick with COVID-19 or think you might have it, take steps to help protect other people from getting sick. Stay home except to get medical care. Call the doctor before visiting. Separate yourself from others who live with you. Wear a cloth face covering to protect others. Cover your coughs and sneezes with a tissue and clean your hands right away. Avoid sharing items with other people in your home. This includes things like towels and bedding. Be sure dishes are washed in hot water or the dishwasher before anyone else uses them. Stay aware of how you feel. If you start to have difficulty breathing or if you're worried about your health, call your doctor. For more tips, visit cdc.gov.
Welcome back to the Benchwarmers Podcast, where being all talk is actually a good thing. Now, back to the action. Or talk, I guess.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. I am still Lou Ruggieri. That is still Jose Ortiz. And this is still the Benchwarmers Podcast. Hopefully you're following along. iHeartRadio podcasting, Amazon Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, at The Benchwarmers Podcast, at the BW Pod on Twitter, and the new thebenchwarmers.com, Benchwarmers with a Z. Go there for all the fun, latest news and notes and articles and things like we have coming up later, our championship round of our breakfast cereal bracket. Lucky Charms taking on Cinnamon Toast Crunch. We'll have the winner of that a little bit later. Very exciting. I can't wait. Highlight and lowlight for the NBA coming up, and going around the NBA to kind of give you a check-in, I guess we'll call it, kind of just check in on what the, some of the highlights and headlines of the NBA in this last week. But right now we're staying with the NFL, and we started this last week, and I think we're going to do it also after the draft. We're going to do it once before the draft, once after the draft, to kind of see where we stand and see if these things change or not. But it's called Reload or Rebuild, and basically we're going through all the teams in the NFC this week. That's it.
Let's go ahead and take it right away. I'm going to start with the NFC East. We'll try and do a rapid fire. Try and keep it to one sentence if possible.
All right.
Ready? The Washington football team.
This one is one of the harder ones, I think. I'm going to say... I mean, they made the playoffs last year, so I'm going to say rebuild, but it's kind of like it's as borderline as you can get, because I think they need to establish who their quarterback is officially, but I'm going to say rebuild.
Yeah, I'm going to say rebuild. I'm kind of the same spot where you are. It just feels like they're one good quarterback away, but so is half the NFL.
Yeah.
So I think
it's
this
kind
is
of an important position.
Yeah. All right, so we both say rebuild. All right, New York Giants.
They're rebuild for sure. They're on the tail end of a rebuild, but I think that they're still making their way up.
I mean, that's a fair way of looking at it. I'm actually saying this is a reload season for me, because you have to see who Daniel Jones is. 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions in year one, and then last year 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Who is this guy? You go out and they signed
Galladay.
Kenny Galladay. They have a good team around him. It's time to get it done, and this is a winnable division. So
yeah, I'd like to see them. I'd like to see Evan Ingram healthy and Saquon Barkley healthy, and see what that team can do.
Yeah, that's why I just feel like you have a running back, you have a tight end, you have a wide receiver, you have a decent offensive line, you have a top end cornerback in Bradbury. Why is this? This should be a reload. But either way.
Yep.
We are going to your Dallas Cowboys.
I hate them so much. I guess it's a reload. I mean, you look at the offensive talent on the team. I saw somebody wearing a CeeDee Lamb jersey the other day for the first time and kind of I was like, oh, front runner. It's Dak. I mean, this is make or break time for Dak. He got his money. He got everything he could possibly want, except maybe for part ownership in the team. I've never seen Jerry Jones cave quite the way he did for a guy that is marginally good at best. But if they can add pieces on defense and give Dak a little breathing room, then maybe they can do something. I begrudgingly I say reload.
This has to be it better be a reload based on all the money they spent, not only on Dak, but on the offensive line, on Ezekiel Elliott, on Amari Cooper. Like, if this is not a reload, then everyone in that organization needs to be fired. They were killed by injury.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. So they were killed by injuries last year. And if they can address defense in the draft, why can't they win this division? And last but not least, the Philadelphia Eagles.
At least. You could say least. I think that's fine.
Okay.
Since 2017, the Eagles have just plummeted. And, they had their Super Bowl. They won, so they got that monkey off their back. But this is a team that is in turmoil. And I don't see them being very good anytime soon, and it's a shame because they do have some good pieces on that team, but not enough to really make a dent in the playoffs. So I'm going to say reload, and it's a heavy reload.
You mean heavy reload or heavy rebuild?
Or rebuild, excuse me.
Yeah, because I was like, wait a minute, you had it all built up for rebuild.
Yeah, no, rebuild. Sorry. Yeah.
Surprise ending. No. Yeah, I'm with you with the rebuild. Either Carson Wentz was a bad quarterback last season, or the Eagles were a bad team on offense last year. One of those two things has to be true.
Or both.
And I'm thinking on the latter. Well, or both could be true, yes.
Yeah.
This team will be drafting in the top 10 next season. Absolute rebuild. All right, let's go to the NFC West. Seattle Seahawks.
I think these are all reloads. I think the entire NFC West is probably.
I have them all reloaded. I have all reloads as well.
we can go through them. I don't want to just jump, but I think that's spoiler alert.
Same thing. I was like, wow, these are all reloads.
Yeah.
All right, Seattle Seahawks.
It's so I guess. I mean, they are a reload, but they have to reload very specifically because Russell Wilson needs to feel like they're doing something to kind of keep him at least reasonably happy. They did try to add Holden Smith on defense, who now has a warrant out for his arrest, which I thought was interesting, and that is unfortunate. So it's exactly. So it's tough to see that, but I think that if they reload very, very specifically, they'll be a great team.
It's interesting. This is a reload to me too, but this is I kind of feel that they're very tenuous reload because they're teetering, in my opinion, on being a rebuild pretty soon. And the problem is they only have 3 draft picks this year: 2nd round, 4th round, and 7th round. I'm not sure how you can address their offensive line and their defense, which are their 2 biggest needs in my opinion, with those 3. But yeah, it's definitely a reload. So Los Angeles Rams.
The Rams are definitely reload. I mean, they're and they did reload. They got rid of Jared Goff. They brought in Matt Stafford, who I think is a much better quarterback than Jared Goff. And Matt Stafford's going to actually know what it's like to play with a good defense and more than one good offensive weapon around him, and to have a great coach for the first time in his entire career. So this team is ready and poised to make a deep, deep playoff run and possibly challenge the Bucs for NFC superiority.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I don't really have much to add. There's no reason why this team shouldn't succeed. Definitely a reload.
Yep.
Arizona Cardinals.
This one is the closest I could come to saying rebuild. And the only reason I'm not saying rebuild is because they've already kind of rebuilt. I mean, they have, they made a lot of offseason moves. J.J. Watt, A.J. Green, and, those are supplemental pieces at best, but they're still good enough. They signed, they signed James Conner, we talked about. They let go of Kenyon Drake. But they still have DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray. So it's hard to say a team with those 2 pieces alone is generally going to be a rebuild or a reload over rebuild.
Yeah, they have all the pieces that they need. It's definitely a reload. You would have liked it. J.J. Watt and A.J. Green, it's hard to know who you're really getting with those 2 players. Where are they in their career? I do think they could use another young playmaker on that offense, probably at the tight end position. But yeah, definitely a reload. And the San Francisco 49ers.
Well, the 49ers, it's weird because maybe this is the team they're not really rebuilding. I mean, they're rebuilding from injury.
Yeah.
But I guess, presumably they're going to have most of their team back. So it has to, I guess I don't know though, because if they end up taking Mac Jones, that means Jimmy Garoppolo is probably on the outs, and that could happen as early as, this season.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to think. You know what? I might say rebuild. This might be rebuild.
All right. I'm looking at this as a reload, not just because I'm a 49ers fan. You look at, they were completely decimated with injuries. Like if going into 2020, if we were playing this game, we would not have said the 49ers were a rebuild, right? We said they were a reload. So assuming that all the players they had are still good, they should be pretty good, and they're poised to draft a franchise quarterback. As far as assuming that they draft the right quarterback. As far as Jimmy Garoppolo, I think they're going to kind of do what the Kansas City Chiefs did where you just let Jimmy Garoppolo start out the year, start the year and maybe even finish the year. And then in the offseason, you trade him for whatever you can get. Maybe you can get a second-round pick, maybe you get a third-round pick, and then you start with your new franchise quarterback the next season. So that's what I would do if I were them. That's exactly. I would not be trading Jimmy Garoppolo this season. I'd be kind of grooming the quarterback for a year.
Yeah, I guess the sort of the litmus test for me in my head, just going through these when we were just doing research for it was, teams that were not stable at the quarterbacking position. It's hard for me to say, that they're not rebuilding, because it's just it's the most important position in sports, and it's tough if you don't have that set. You kind of don't have anything.
But it's interesting, though, that you say that, not to go on too much of a tangent, because you're always preaching, get the guy on the rookie contract, get the guy on the rookie contract, get the guy on the rookie contract.
Yes.
It's hard to have a guy who's settled and ready to go who's on a rookie contract.
Well, let's move on to other divisions, and I'll explain and give you some examples of what I'm talking about.
Okay, NFC North, Green Bay.
All right, so Green Bay, I think, is obviously in reload, and they do have a quarterback on a rookie deal, but they also happen to have the MVP of the league last season in Aaron Rodgers. I was wondering this, and this is kind of a stupid thing to think, but what if Aaron Rodgers last season before the draft went in and just said, guys, with this draft, I really want you to can you show me some love, please? And then there was just, maybe Matt LaFleur is just kind of a prankster. I
my goodness.
Almost hope that actually happened. If
that didn't, they need to act that out on Saturday Night Live.
And if that's not a meme money somewhere, I'm going to be very very disappointed.
You need to go out and make it.
Well, if I knew how, I would, but otherwise, I think show me some love, and they whoops. Yeah, they're reload. Excuse me. Jeez, can't get those straight.
This is an obvious reload. The top 5 quarterback, top 3 quarterback, really, top 5 wide receiver, top 5 running back. They probably need a playmaker at one of their interior linebacker positions, but this is a great team. They don't need, as much as you might think they need help on offense, they had the best offense in the NFL last year. So everyone else needed more help than they did on offense. So they're ready to go. Okay, here we go. Let's move on to another team that does have he's not on the team anymore. Chicago Bears.
Oh, it's rebuild.
Absolutely. Andy Dalton's your quarterback. Let's move on.
Yeah, we talked about Alex Smith before as the bridge quarterback. I mean, Andy Dalton is looking like he might be challenging for that position pretty soon.
Minnesota Vikings.
This one is tough because, like I was saying before, the quarterback position, Kirk Cousins is right on that sort of Mendoza line of, is it anybody that's a little better than him, I think, is a good quarterback, and anybody that's a little worse than him, I think, is a terrible quarterback. He's sort of he's almost like 16 out of 32 is where I'd almost put him. But I'm going to say reload because they have players coming back on defense. They were really banged up last year. Yeah. They have a good offense, and Kirk Cousins is good enough, and he had a pretty good statistical year last year. But it's a reload, but it's with a question mark.
Agree with everything you said. This team has a 1 to 2 year window to really try and get something done. Biggest needs are on defense, but this is an absolute reload. Whether people want to admit it or not, Kirk Cousins is a top 10 NFL quarterback, period. There's just no other way to argue it.
In just statistically?
Statistically, yeah. What else? No one else is winning the Super Bowl, so only one quarterback won the Super Bowl. Statistically, he's the top 10 NFL quarterback. I don't know how else you would measure it.
In all categories, in passing yards, passing touchdowns.
I wouldn't say I don't know.
Red zone efficiency. I mean, we all right. I don't want to get into that. We can dive into that. We can
go ahead and dive into it. Listen, we're going to have our top 10 as we get into the offseason, deeper into the offseason. We're going to have our top 10 quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends. We're going to go all through it. But I think he had 32 touchdowns and like 11 interceptions last season. Like those are top 10 NFL numbers. Like if you just look at the other quarterbacks, especially if Deshaun Watson doesn't play next year, I mean, I don't know if you could name 10 better quarterbacks right now than Kirk Cousins. That like not based on your feeling or like, hey, I think Kyler Murray is better or I think Justin Herbert's better. This guy's actually been proven to be better than those guys.
Yeah, but how about who would you want more? I can
because those guys are younger.
I want more.
Yeah,
well,
sure. I want Justin Herbert because he's younger and he's going to have a longer career. I want all these players more because we already know Kirk Cousins' ceiling, right? We already know this is as good as he's going to get. We don't know how good Justin Herbert will be, or how good Kyler Murray will be, or how good Lamar Jackson will be. Right now, if you had a Super Bowl contending team, and you could have Kirk Cousins, or on let's say on a rookie salary, Kirk Cousins or Lamar Jackson, who are you taking?
Lamar Jackson's a tough one because I need to know how their team is set up.
Okay, then Kirk Cousins or Justin Herbert.
Justin Herbert, no question.
Yeah, question. I would take Kirk Cousins. I would take Kirk Cousins right now.
Justin Herbert was almost as good as Kirk Cousins was last season in his first year playing one less game.
Listen, Lamar Jackson was an MVP 2 years ago. I'm waiting for the second year to see how he adjusts and how teams adjust to them. All right. Like I said, we'll get into this.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Detroit Lions.
Perennial rebuild.
The mother of rebuilds. This franchise needs to learn to rebuild better. Let's move on.
Now that Cleveland is a real team that Lions have taken over as kind of the dumpster fire of the NFL.
Our last division, Tampa Bay.
Obvious reload.
Yep, obvious reload, not much to say.
They did sign, by the way, I don't know if you saw this or not. I forgot to mention it in the news, but they signed Giovanni Bernard.
Oh, yeah.
A couple days ago. And, Giovanni Bernard, Cincinnati running back, backup running back. Although Giovanni Bernard by himself is not a great running back, I don't think. He's okay, but I think what he adds to the Bucs is exactly what I thought the Bucs needed pretty much since Tom got there, was that Tom needed his James White safety net, with that little dump-off guy that can catch out of the backfield, and he hasn't had that really. I mean, Rojo is kind of okay. Fournette has got okay hands, but they're not pass-catching running backs. They're running backs that occasionally catch passes. But Giovanni Bernard is a receiving back, and I think that it's an underrated move. It's a sneaky good move for Tom Brady and the Buccaneers.
Yeah, the team that basically spent most of their money just keeping everyone that they had on their Super Bowl winning team, to add a piece like Giovanni Bernard to a running back room that, let's all be honest, needed to improve. This is obvious reload. I'm just scared of how good this team could be next year. All right, New Orleans Saints.
See, this goes to what I was talking about earlier. With a team without a quarterback feels like it should be a rebuild, but the New Orleans Saints are so stacked on offense and defense that if they just have average quarterback play, they're going to be competitive. So I'm going to say reload. It's a very important reload, and they better pick the right bullet for the gun. But I think it's a reload, despite their biggest need being quarterback.
Yeah, I'm going the opposite way. I think it's a rebuild. I'm expecting a step back from the Saints in 2021. I kind of feel like they were kind of barely holding it together last year. I know that the record says differently. I wasn't overly impressed watching them from week to week last season. I know I think they were 12-4 last year, so obviously they had the numbers, but I don't like Taysom Hill as a quarterback. Obviously don't like Jameis Winston as a quarterback. They're not in a position to draft, unless they get lucky. They could find a gem somewhere, but they're not really in position to draft a high-end, talented quarterback. So I'm expecting a step back. It's hard to explain, but so rebuild for me.
Okay.
Carolina
is interesting because I feel like they're on the very, very tail end of a rebuild. With Sam Darnold now. I mean, they still have Teddy Bridgewater, which is going to be interesting. But it feels like they're still rebuilding, and presumably Christian McCaffrey is going to be back, hopefully for more than one game this year. And it's a rebuild, but it's on the very tail end of a rebuild.
Yeah, I agree. They're like most of the NFL, really just one good quarterback away. Maybe that quarterback is Sam Darnold. Who knows? But they definitely need a quarterback, so it's rebuild. Our last one, Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, and this one is almost as hard as Washington was. I feel like there's no wrong answer here. Because Atlanta could go neither way that they go would surprise me. I think I'm going to say it's their very last reload because, Matt Ryan is kind of on the tail end of his career. Julio Jones is, he's getting older. They have Calvin Ridley, who's amazing, but they need so much on defense. And I keep hearing about how they might take Kyle Pitts at number 4, the tight end out of Florida. Mm-hmm. And while I'd love to see that offensive weaponry intact, that's an unbelievable receiving core. They're just so bad on defense that I think it's not a smart move. But I'm going to say reload for the last time, at least under the Matt Ryan regime.
Well, I can't wait until next week when we can get into some deep draft strategy moves because I actually don't think the Kyle Pitts draft pick would be so bad. I kind of look at it like last year we were upset with the Packers for drafting a quarterback instead of getting more weapons for Aaron Rodgers. And I'm just like, Falcons, draft a running back this year. Mike Davis cannot be your starter. Go get a real running back. But either way, the pragmatist inside of me says rebuild because I'm like, you're not going to have another draft pick at this spot. You go get yourself a quarterback. But I think you have to go after it at least one more time with Matt Ryan. You just have to. He's a borderline Hall of Fame quarterback. You have to go after it. So, reload.
Yeah, and they're just it's tough with them because they do need a running back. I forgot that they're kind of lacking in that area, but that Hayden Hurst they have already. I mean, Kyle Pitts would be an upgrade over Hayden Hurst, but it's not like Hayden Hurst was bad. The Falcons were 4-12 last year, but they lost a lot of games with just it's some crazy statistic that I don't have in front of me, but just the amount of games they lost kind of in the final minutes, most notably the Cowboys game with the special teams blunder they had in hand. It seemed like they were snake bitten last year. And I think that they can make some noise, although they're in a tough division.
Yeah. So that's it. That's the reload or rebuild.
So we're going to redo that or reload that come once the draft is here and kind of see if we changed our mind on any of these with the additions that each of these teams have made in the draft this year. So that's going to be some fun. Coming up a little bit, we have our breakfast cereal bracket. It's the championship. We have Lucky Charms going against Cinnamon Toast Crunch. But coming up next, we have to take a break and come back. We're going to go around the NBA, kind of touch on news and notes, our highlight and lowlight, and more. So stick around. This is the Benchwarmers Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Benchwarmers Podcast. Follow along with us on the Benchwarmers Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to review us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.